Many times we're concerned with making sure our servers and our endpoints are secured, locked down, but we forget about our network devices. To find out more about network device security, stay tuned.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to more GSEC. We're going to be talking about network device security. I'm going to mess that up at least one time in this episode because
we have another episode
that's called network security devices. But Daniel, we're talking about like access points and routers and things like that we need to make sure are locked down. Otherwise, people go, "Ha, you thought your computers are safe, right?"
Yes, perfect place to start. Let's start talking about what is a network device, right? And a network device is any device that is attached to the network. Typically, we think of those things as the things that make the network a network, like make that network work, if that makes sense. Let's use the use of work a lot. I can't help it because that's English for
Yeah,
it.
it's like there's a net of things and
And they
it's
work
working
together.
Yeah. Man, I tell you what.
Making sure that that is working
Securely.
There you go. Network.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lot of fun. English language. So this is the wireless access points, the routers, the switches, God forbid a hub that you might find on your network. Maybe a repeater or two. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about here today. Now, properly, I would argue that computers like workstations, desktops, servers, even mobile devices, I would argue those are also network devices because they connect to the network. I always used to go by the mantra of if it has a network interface card of some ilk, it's a network device. But I think today what they really want us to talk about is those devices.
And I guess where we could subdivide that are if proper, right, access points versus switches.
Right.
These are network infrastructure devices.
Correct.
Versus just devices that hang out on the network.
Right.
But then it gets weird because you have some virtualized ones that actually live.
This is a very difficult thing for us to stick a box around. I feel like the spirit of this is those devices that are switches, routers, access points, kind of properly, right? So that's what we're going to focus on. We talk a lot about those other devices anyway, so I thought it was a good place to differentiate.
So Daniel, I'll be honest with you. I tend to not think about these because I'm like, routers, what are they going to do? Right? Switches, what are they going to do? But I'm guessing there's actually like legitimate risks that I should be concerned about, right?
That's exactly right. Because, yeah, have you seen the news lately? There are huge risks that are associated with network devices. Look at Cisco. Go and just look at Cisco devices. Check out just recently. Today is February the 20th of 2020. I think within the last few weeks, Cisco has had to go, we've had some problems. And then in the last few months, they've had to go, well, there's more problems because they have an operating system that runs the device itself, right? You also have to worry about like supply chain attacks, right? That we've seen this in the past where I think it was the CIA or the NSA actually got a hold of some network devices, implanted chips that gave them backdoor access into the device itself, packaged it all back up. No one was any the wiser, and then sent them on to their end destinations. So risks associated with network devices. Now, that's a supply chain attack. That's a tough one to mitigate against, right? You have to just kind of do some research and make sure that there's
I thought you were going to go cross your fingers and hope it doesn't happen.
I was going to say, you get them dice out. Let's go.
And
All right, security.
Ultimately, that probably boils down to your relative value to the attacker.
Correct.
Because it is a lot of work. I've watched some presentations on people trying to make sure that they can mitigate against that.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard. There's some great advances, but it's a lot of work on the attacker side to also do those things. So,
yeah.
But network devices, though, I'm guessing since they're on the network, things can get a little crazy. Like they can be out in the parking lot, right?
Oh, yeah. If we're talking wireless, that's exactly right. Because how far does my wireless access point bleed out into the parking lot? Have I even tried to think about that? That is a risk. If someone's able to attack our network from outside of our building without even having to be properly connected, we need to think about those things, right? So that's definitely a thing. So let's talk about this. I kind of broke it down into general categories. So misconfigured devices. I have a device, it has default configurations, and I left it, right? I think we've talked about this in the past. We should not do that, right? Unauthorized access. There's a way to access the device. Have I thought about someone unauthorized gaining access through that portal? If I haven't, I need to get that into the front of my brain. I'm using unencryption. I'm not using any encryption. It's unencrypted data crossing the network. All right, so it's all clear. I'm not going to insult your intelligence, and hopefully you're starting to see, well, that's a glaring problem. I should probably do something about that. I need to concern myself with that as a security issue, because if sensitive information is crossing the wire in an unsecure manner, well, I'm breaking the CIA triad, right? So there we go. But these are the risks associated. Unnecessary services. I got something turned on and it ain't doing nothing. It's just sitting there doing nothing. And since I'm not using it, I'm probably not really, it's kind of out of sight, out of the mind kind of thing. And then lastly, vulnerable operating systems, or IOSs, or applications that run on the device itself. We need to be concerning ourselves with that. So those are generally the risks associated with our network devices. So now we got to kind of turn the table around. And Justin, you've got something to say.
Yeah, it just hit me. So I know our local ISP like locks down certain traffic. Like I can't run an email server from my house, right? Because I would set up a spam server.
Right.
It's bad. But
You
also
would never do that though, right?
Anyway, so
Some mad money in spamming.
yeah, there is. But I've also tried to set up like web servers, and if I'm not mistaken, I think they block that traffic from residential IPs as well, which is kind of weird. Now, I could set it up on my internal network and have it still run. It just can't reach out to the internet. And so I was like, wait a minute, that means I could still run it, leave it running. And you go, oh, well, they block all that traffic at the ISP level. Guess what? That does not mean that you're secure, because if someone's on your network, they might still be able to get to your web server. And if you're not updating it because you're like, oh, it's all right, then it's like this false sense of security. So something to think about. Speaking of,
It is a good thought.
mitigating, right? We have these broad brush risk. How do we protect ourselves against them?
Well, again, I don't want to insult your intelligence, but it's going to be the inverse of the problem. Right?
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you thought of that.
Yeah, I know, right? But it happens that people just don't think about that. So we're trying to point that out and make sure that you're aware of them, because you might not have thought about it. And here we are today having an intervention. You need to think about these things. So let's jump into strategies for mitigation and how did I label it? Probably just like security measures in general, okay? What can we do? Okay, we'll just start with, kind of like I said, the inverse of what we saw before. Use secure configurations. If you have misconfigured devices, you're using insecure configurations, well, let's go back through that. Let's opt into security. Let's change defaults everywhere possible. If it's holding something in a path on the file system, so I think about access points. The thing that really drives this point home for me was I was listening to a podcast. Guy was talking about how he had found hundreds of ODay exploits for wireless access points. And he's like, I'm not even really that smart. The thing is I just started poking around and I realized, oh, this has a default path that stores information. And guess what's inside that information? Your username and password to access the device. I look for that kind of stuff. It doesn't take a genius, it just takes time and effort. So he sits down, he'll buy a new access point, he'll plug it in, turn it on, and start poking at it. What's this? What's that? What's this service do? Where does it store that information? Can I gain further access down that rabbit hole? If I can, what's there? So changing default locations, changing default ways that things are being accessed, obviously usernames and passwords, right? Get those defaults out of the way, reconfigure that thing, and anytime you can opt into a security function, if you can do that, you should do that kind of idea. That's the idea.
This is one of those things that when I first started, playing around with technology. I didn't really think about it. And then I started noticing, depending on your manufacturer, a lot of times they're like, go to this website on your network, which will redirect you to like your main like console access. And they always have, and then type this in. Because this is what it comes from the factory with. It's like admin or admin Netgear or something like that.
Right.
And then boom, you're in. Which you go, oh, well, who cares? Yeah, you should care.
You should care.
Yeah.
You should care a lot. Or having, we talked about services. Unused services. A lot of these devices, surprisingly enough, will use a service like Telnet that's just enabled. Why? We have secure services, such as SSH or SFTP instead of FTP. Don't use plain text services that are going to get you in the weeds. And if you're coupling that with poor password policy, right? Well, what do we do about these things? Well, if you're using a service like Telnet, turn that off. Turn on SSH. If it doesn't support SSH, you should probably look into another device. If you must use this device, you're going, well, I have no choice, I have to use this. Then find another security control that you can stick in line that encrypts the traffic. And maybe create a VPN tunnel with encryption, IPsec. That way, all that stuff from end to end is getting encrypted, even though you have to use something like Telnet or FTP. So hopefully you're starting to see some mitigations. I'm just kind of rambling them out right now, but I had them more structured for us to go through. But it was just a perfect storm of, this is very common to see this type of insecure configuration. Now, they do that purposefully, and you might think that's crazy. Why in the world would they do that purposefully? Well, because when you buy the device, you need to be able to access it, and it needs to be easy. But they're trusting you to do your due diligence now that you've purchased the device to secure yourself. If they're really good at their job, they'll put in those recommendations inside the manual that I'm sure gets read from cover to cover when you open the box.
There's almost implied consent when you purchase these devices and say, like, okay, we've made it easy for you. You're good to go. Boom. It's now your responsibility.
Yeah.
A second responsibility that I know destroys, I'm sure my parents' house is hard. Anyway, firmware updates on these devices and like patching. They do need updates. And if they don't have them, then boom, you go, well, what could they do? botnet.
Yeah.
That's my first thought.
You are now a point of contact for a hacker's botnet to attack X, Y, or Z, and it's causing people to have business issues, or it's attacking your state, or whatever. Who knows, right? The point is, don't be a part of that. And it's easy to do. Patch your systems. Every now and then, just set a reminder for yourself, hey, log into that thing. The problem with this stuff is, and this is why like IoT is a real problem, is the consumer. Who is consuming these things? If you're talking about like Cisco routers and switches or Juniper, F5, big data kind of stuff, then you probably got somebody with a brain in their head that knows tech and is savvy enough to configure these things securely. We just have to make that part of their job description, that's what they do. But if you're talking about an end user device, maybe somebody's starting a small business out of their home. They don't know. They just go buy something off the shelf. They plug it in, they turn it on, I have access. But you're running a business. And if you've got clients for your business, that data needs to be secured. We're just as responsible as big data is for securing those systems up, right? So let me make sure I didn't forget anything. We've covered use strong password policies, MFA, 2FA, if you can possibly get away with it, multi-factor authentication, use encrypted services in lieu of any unencrypted services or protocols, turn off unused services, thank you, Justin, for mentioning patching and updates. Not just do it, but schedule it. This is a cyclical thing, something you do on a regular basis. Follow it like a religion. You should be patching. A lot of unauthorized access comes through a vulnerability that could have been solved by a patch. So make sure that's part of it. Then schedule security audits. Like, check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Oh, show.
That is how you got to roll, right? Are the security controls that I put in place and the functionalities, I've changed those defaults, I've done this, I've done that. let me poke at this thing and see if I'm able to circumvent any of this stuff or if I missed anything. And then do that on a regular schedule. Again, you got to lather, rinse, repeat this stuff. It never ends. Security is a journey, not a destination. And if you've never heard that before, it is very true. You're going to continue. This is a living thing that you're going to have to re-engage with from time to time to make sure and verify that all the stuff you're trying to do is working, that new things haven't popped up that you now need to protect against. So if you're not involved in that life cycle in some way, shape, or form, you're doing yourself a disservice and you're just waiting for an attack to occur. Justin, there you go. Network device security wrapped up in a ball.
You know what I recommend?
What's that?
Actually employ these practices, maybe not the security audits to that extent, as like honeypots or like setting up a SIEM, but in your personal home networks.
Yes.
Right? Because if you do that, then it becomes a forefront thought for any other activities you may engage in.
Philosophy.
I try to do it. I'm not necessarily the best at it all the time, but I do. Firmware updates, taking care of things like that. So employ those. I'm sure you're like, well, wait a minute. Obviously you did. Yeah, you would think they're obvious. Just go check your networks. You may find some interesting things. And well, speaking of interesting things, we got more GSEC coming your way. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. So signing out for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Justin Innocent.
I'm Daniel Lowry.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.